Thank you for that. I told the Berkeley scholars that they had to yell too. It's a little bit harder with a single syllable name though. It kind of sort of like, but thank you. Alan quipped last year at the meeting that I was brave to take on the site directorship in its very last year. But I don't think that's not exactly the word that I would have chosen. I think it's I think just echoing what Kathy said, it's been a pleasure and a privilege just the entire time as associate director under John, and then stepping in as director. The quality of the cohorts at Berkeley has been amazing. And just having the opportunity to be in seminars with these scholars who are at these opening stages of their careers, hearing their ideas, just seeing how talented they are has been quite amazing. And I was reflecting on the fact that in some senses, this program has always sort of felt like where I fit in. In political science at Berkeley, I was a graduate student in the American politics section, and spent a lot of time at IGS under Nelson Polsby and Bruce Kane, and they just ribbed me constantly because I did study institutions, but I actually also cared about the public policies that those institutions produced. And so they constantly were sort of at me like, oh, Ann Keller, she's so weird, which is really a great way to bond. And I had a low moment at one point where I was like, that's it, I'm quitting this political science thing, I'm out of here. And Bruce Kane was like, no, you're not, and he gave me a summer research job and convinced me to stay. And so I realized that the ribbing was just ribbing. They really felt like I was part of the team. But when I became a scholar, I really began to understand why it was that there was a place where, indeed, I felt like I fit in. So I wanted I think so many people who have been talking have talked about the program's goals, what the program has produced. Alan and Mark gave all these statistics and slides about how the vision of the program, how the scholars who have been in the program have changed the disciplines. So I want to just tell a little bit of my own sort of personal story through it, and not too much try to generalize from an N of one, but I think that my trajectory is one that's been repeated on so many occasions. One of the things, let me say that when I started the program, I was really struck by the spirit of this sort of a haven of intellectual ideas and collegiality. I think this is a place where fledgling ideas were met. They were not judged necessarily on their immediate expression, but on their promise. And so a whole host of people, very smart people, just like the room today, would come to these meetings, and they would bring their best game in thinking about how that promise might be met. And I think a huge part of this program has also been the recognition that scholarship, the people who got game, do not come in kind of the usual packages that are recognized in our disciplines. As a scholar preparing for my presentations, the most ominous figure for me at the time was Paula Lantz. Don't get me wrong, she never had harsh words for scholars, she never undermined. What was intimidating was how consistent she was about asking the most perceptive questions in the room. How did she do that across all the presentations, across all the disciplines? But excellent scholarship, professionalism, and collegiality comes in all sorts of packages, and this community, I think, was early in recognizing that and has really produced that. Not to put too many other statistics up, but in my own discipline, I think currently 24% of tenure-track faculty are women. So being in this community, it feels different. It's a palpable difference. And so that's mattered. So for the people who that was part of your vision, thank you for realizing it in such a meaningful way. I think one of the programs, so some of the program's explicit goals, one was to take scholars who weren't focusing on health policy and bring them to health policy, to sort of roll the dice that people who weren't already committed would, through a postdoctoral program, shift part of their, maybe not all of their research, but some of their research to the program. At the end of his talk yesterday, Adam Goldstein said, "The program was successful. He's now been infected with an interest in healthcare policy." I think there's probably a chorus of voices, mine included, in this room and in our extended network who would say exactly the same thing. My own trajectory, I think, also reflects the goal of the goal of interdisciplinarity, as well as that aspect of not doing health policy initially when I came into the program and then doing it. I'm now at a school of public health, so I hope I do health policy now. So I want to say that one of the first pieces of scholarship that really sparked my own thinking was Abigail Segui's work on the fat acceptance movement, which really shaped my own interest in thinking about traditional disease identity groups and why they were mobilized and how they were mobilized. I found that studying these sort of strong disease identities that spur mobilization actually appear to prevent coalition formation across groups. This leaves a vast potential untapped resource of collective action on the table. I came to the program with a focus on environmental politics. That was my lens coming into it. That's what made me weird at IGS. Cared about the environment. And I found the contrast with health politics and environmental politics to be quite stark. It wasn't something I anticipated coming into this. In the environmental domain, one finds a robust social movement, a set of professionalized public interest organizations that demand that the state intervene to limit the negative externalities imposed by industries that are not trusted by the public. Let's contrast this with health politics. In health politics, the state is held in check by powerful stakeholders whom the relatively under-mobilized public trust much more than they trust the state. It's like an inversion of what I was used to in environmental politics. I think this means that general interest policies have a much lower chance in health of being enacted in the first place, and they also have a much lower chance of surviving. So this was a new arena for me when I was thinking about environmental health. So I think in those comments, talking with social movements, talking about identity, also talking politics, you can see that sociology has influenced my thinking. I don't want to leave the economists out, though. Some of my best friends are economists. Hi, Richard. Are you still here? I think I've learned from economists quite a bit. For instance, I know that moral hazard is not something that oath-taking teens face on prom night. Seriously, though. I know from health economists that healthcare does not function as a market, and though we try to throw so many policies at the healthcare system, assuming that it will somehow, maybe tomorrow it will function as a market, that it still doesn't function very well as a market. And this fact, and things like information asymmetries and the market failure that underproduces for things like comparative effectiveness research have very much shaped my own current project in the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. So economists, you have also had your influence. Was I infected with an interest in health policy? Yes, I think so. Is my approach stronger for the interdisciplinary design of the program? Without a doubt. Sorry, I'm the only person to actually start to get upset about the loss of the program. Take a moment. So when I look back, I think the picture is quite rosy. Look at what this program has accomplished. Many of the goals have been amply met. I think when I look ahead, I'm a little less certain about where we go next. I'm grateful to the Foundation for all of the opportunities from a scholar to associate director to site director. But I have to say that there are a few things that give me a bit of pause when I think about what we're doing going ahead. In thinking about the Foundation's new direction, my first reaction was a bit of dismay. Not understanding necessarily what pursuing a culture of health was, but in one of my first reactions was to assume that it sounds all too much like falling back on individual behavior change, which made me wonder if the Foundation sort of looked at structural determinants of health and blinked. At the same time, when I think about that and when I think about my initial reaction, I also started to think that there's maybe some wisdom right now in sort of moving away from some capital P politics at this particular juncture. I have a long-standing focus in looking at expertise in public decision-making in my work, and I'm starting to feel like a Sovietologist in 1989. Wendy Ron and program alum Eric Oliver have recently done research on Trump supporters and has found that a very important pillar of his support comes from populist sentiment that's blatantly anti-expert. So the research community, we walk around talking about evidence this, evidence-based this, evidence-based that, but there's a vast swath of the American electorate who base their very political identity on rejecting what the research community has to say outright. I feel like welcome to the post-Enlightenment. This is sort of where we are. So I think, echoing what Kathy said, the tasks before us the health policy issues are large, the issues are complex, and how we address them, I think, is really important. So when I say that initially I was sort of dismayed by where I saw the Foundation going, certainly the part of that is personal, like how can you take away my community? But I also don't stand here articulating anything. I don't have a set of prescriptions for what I think, what else I think might be happening. So I think in that sense I'm very cautiously optimistic about the approach for culture of health, and I hope that this community will stay active in that pursuit. I want to end my comments on a positive note, just thinking about where we're going, even though I said I'm sort of looking forward and not so sure that the picture is rosy. I think that the scholars in the program who have been supported and mentored are now plentiful enough that they can now they are now going forward and training their own PhD students. So maybe we're self-replicating at this point. But I feel like this is going to be different without the program bringing these disciplines together every year to talk with a new set of scholars, looking at the emerging scholars in our disciplines who might bring their game to health policy. So what will this community look like after we walk out of Aspen and we don't have this particular format and this particular opportunity to interact? I think that political scientists should never engage in forecasting. We're not very good at that, so I'm going to try not to do that. But I definitely think that it's going to be hard to maintain this community in the way that it's been maintained by the foundation and the program and the NAC's commitment over the entire time that the program has been here. I can't stand up here and say it's going to look the same as it's been. It's going to be hard to maintain that. On the positive note, though, I can say with all honesty that we're certainly much more than we would have been without the foundation and without Alan's leadership, without the dedication of the NPO and all the members of the NAC. So I want to just close with thanking the people who have shaped my role here with the Berkeley site, Richard First, who is the Berkeley site director, John, who mentored me, Joan Bloom, who I'm not sure is still in the room, has also been a great mentor for me. Obviously, I want to thank Alan, and I want to thank Mark, Lori, the foundation, and of course, all the programs and scholars that I now think of as colleagues and friends. Thank you.